The earth was restless. Long before cities, before kings, before even the first true word had passed from one mouth to another, the land trembled under the weight of time. Volcanoes grumbled on distant horizons. The winds carried sand from places no foot had yet touched. And across the wide, golden savanna, where trees clawed desperately at the sky, a young creature crouched beside a stream, her fingers dipped in its cool, trembling current. Her name, though never written nor spoken aloud, as we would know it, was Lyra. She was not human, not yet. Her brow was heavy, her limbs long and limber, and her feet could still grasp a branch as easily as the dirt below. But in her eyes flickered something ancient and new, a whisper of thought, of wonder, a silence that listened, remembered, and imagined. Lyra was 10 summers old, nearly grown by the reckoning of her kind. She belonged to a small band, perhaps a dozen, who roamed the edges of forest and field in search of fruit, insects, and safety. Safety, more than anything, was scarce. That day, the earth spoke again. It came not as a roar, but a rumble beneath her bare feet. A strange vibration, like the heart of the world was shifting its weight in a slow, grinding sigh. Birds took flight from the canopy. Small rodents dove into the underbrush. Lyra stood alert, ears tilting toward the low moan of stone deep below. She turned to look for the others. Her mother, Nara, the lead female, was already standing upright, near the grove, clutching Lyra's younger sibling to her chest. Around her, the others watched the horizon nervously. No one cried out. Crying drew attention. It was an unspoken rule, older than language. The rumble faded. Only dust remained, swirling in slow spirals above the grass. And then silence, so complete it rang in the bones. The kind of silence that always followed the earth's turning, as if the planet itself was deciding what to become next. That evening, under a bruised purple sky, the clan gathered around a rocky outcrop where figs grew in clumps. Lyra sat beside Nara, chewing thoughtfully on a half-ripe fruit. Her gaze drifted beyond the trees, toward the place where the land sloped downward into distant hills. Her curiosity had been growing in recent weeks, like a slow flame. She had noticed things others did not, the changing pattern of bird calls, the way certain roots grew better where fire had once passed, and most of all, the slow shrinking of the creek near their nesting trees. The world was changing, not just in tremors and dust, but in small, invisible ways, the kind of changes only someone like Lyra, quiet and watchful, would see. That night, she dreamed. In her dream, the sky cracked open like an egg, and light spilled across the plains in golden rivers. Her ancestors, figures made of smoke and fur, walked beside towering beasts, and one of them turned to her, placed a hand on her shoulder, and pointed to the mountains. She woke before dawn, heart pounding. Dreams, for her kind, were not yet stories. They were signals, echoes from somewhere inside the bones. She sat up and listened. Somewhere nearby, insects clicked in the dark, and a distant predator called out, a low, rasping cough. But there was something else, a sound like movement, like a boulder rolling. She rose silently, her body practiced in stealth. Following the scent of damp earth and crushed grass, she made her way to the edge of the ridge where the fig trees grew. Below, the land stretched wide and empty. And then she saw it, Not an animal, not a storm. The stream, her stream, had shifted. The earth's subtle shake the day before had cracked part of the bedrock. The water no longer curved through the familiar grove, but had found a new path downhill, vanishing into a gully where reeds swayed in confusion. It was gone. Where once she had crouched and tasted the cold morning water, there was now only dry stone and a few bewildered frogs stranded in shallow pools. Her throat tightened. This place had been her sanctuary, a source of water, yes, but also a mirror for her thoughts. Now it had abandoned her. When she returned to the group, the others noticed her silence. Nara studied her, as did Talo, the oldest male and silent guardian of the group. They did not need her to speak. They saw in her posture the heaviness of change. By noon, the others confirmed what she already knew. The creek was no longer viable. It was time to move again. Lyra's clan was used to walking, but this journey felt different. The dust seemed hungrier, the sky more watchful. With each mile, the familiar smells of home gave way to strange trees and uncertain winds. They moved south, toward a line of jagged rocks where water sometimes pooled in hidden pockets. Along the way, they passed signs of old migration paths. Broken, branches, worn stones, bones bleached by sun and time. Sometimes they found footprints, but never followed them. Other clans were as dangerous as they were unknown. Lyra stayed near Nara, though her eyes wandered constantly. She was searching for something lost or something yet to be found. By the third day, the land began to rise. The heat thickened, and the trees thinned. And then came the bones, a field of them, not scattered like the leftovers of a hunt, but arranged, almost patterned. Long leg bones, curved ribs, empty skulls nestled against stone. No smell of death, just memory. The clan stopped, uneasy. Even Talo kept to the center, but Lyra moved closer. There, between two fallen trees, she saw something strange. A shape, half buried in the dirt. Not a bone, not quite a rock either. She knelt. It was a tool, not elegant, just a split piece of volcanic glass, sharp-edged and smooth to the touch, but it had been shaped. Someone had broken it with purpose. She lifted it, eyes wide. Not far. From her, Nara made a low warning sound. Others murmured, unsure. But Talo, slow and thoughtful, came forward. He sniffed it, touched its edge, then looked at Lyra, and he nodded. That night, under the stars, Lyra held the shard close. The earth was shifting. The stream was gone. The path ahead was unknown, but in her hand, she carried something new. A memory made solid. A tool for survival, or perhaps something greater, a whisper of what her kind might become. The stone in Lyra's hand was not just a shard. It was a question, one shaped by fingers long forgotten, chipped by choice rather than chance. As the clan moved forward, feet pressed into dust, backs baked under an unforgiving sky, Lyra kept. It tucked in the crook of her arm, close to the heart. For days the land whispered warnings. Rain had not fallen in many moons, and the dry season bit harder each year. Trees grew further apart, and the grass, once soft and tall, crackled underfoot like dried insect wings. Their journey had no clear end, only direction. Southward, they moved toward the distant highlands where the air shimmered and vultures circled. Talo had passed this way long ago in his youth. He remembered a valley where water clung to the stone, where figs grew fat and roots tangled thick in the dark earth. But memory, like weather, could lie. On the 5th morning, they reached the rocks. It was not a valley, but a rise. A great exposed bed of ancient stone, cracked and sun-blasted, with sheer cliffs on either side. Wind howled through its narrow passes. The clan hesitated, clustered beneath the sparse shadow of a thorn tree. Lyra stood apart, staring at the cliffs. Their surfaces were jagged and hostile, but she noticed something the others did not. A faint line of scuff marks led upward, scrapes almost imperceptible, but repeating like a rhythm along the slope. Something had climbed here, not a leopard or hyena, something with hands. Without waiting, she began to ascend. The climb was difficult. The rock was warm, breathing heat from the sun into her palms. Dust stung her eyes. At one point, her foot slipped, sending pebbles tumbling into the void below. But she kept going, gripping with both fingers and toes, drawn not by reason, but by instinct. Halfway up, she found the first mark. It was shallow, but unmistakable. A curve etched into the stone, wide at one end, like a crude symbol. She ran her finger along it. It was not erosion. Someone, some being, had made it. Her heartbeat quickened. At the top of the ridge, the wind opened into a wide plateau, flat, windswept, with scattered rocks arranged in loose rings. Lyra stepped forward carefully. The silence here was different, thick, heavy. She felt watched, not by eyes but by time itself. Then she saw them. Bones, small ones, burnt at the ends, not like the animal remains they passed on the plains. These had been cracked with purpose. Around them, shattered stones, and near the largest rock, a flat surface bore a deep, polished groove, like something had been repeatedly struck against it. She crouched beside it. This was no resting place. It was a workshop. Whoever had lived, or passed, here had shaped. Tools, split stones, broken bones for marrow, maybe even sparked fire. A gust of wind tugged her hair as she reached into her satchel and placed her volcanic shard beside the groove. The pieces belonged together. One ancient, one new, both part of the same breath of becoming. From below, she heard the call. It was Nara's voice, low and urgent. The others were uneasy. She responded with a signal of her own, 3 clicks. Of tongue, soft but steady, it meant safe soon returning. And she did return, descending carefully with the shard once more in hand, and something else, a chipped flake she had taken from the workshop above. A keepsake, a link. When she reached the ground, Tallow studied her face, then her hands. He did not question her. None of them did. But the elder knew. He, too, had once felt the pull of the unknown. Later that day, they followed a narrow path through the rock. The land opened suddenly into a shallow basin, dry now but scarred by old water lines. In its center stood a cluster of fig trees, their roots hunched and thirsty. It was not paradise, but it was shelter. They made camp there, built sleeping nests in the low branches. Lyra sat under the largest tree, striking one stone against another as she had seen in the high place. Chips flew, some shattered. Others split clean, leaving edges that bit into bark when tested. Nara watched, then approached, crouching beside her daughter. With a curious grunt, she picked up a flake and mimicked Lyra's motion, striking it against a stick. The bark peeled away easily. Nara paused, then did it again. By nightfall, half the clan had joined them. The children copied the flint-knapping poorly, giggling when stones cracked unexpectedly. The adults watched, more cautious, more thoughtful. One by one, they took up the task. Lyra sat silently in the center, stone in hand, like a spark passed from another world. That night, the stars emerged in fractured clarity. The basin sky was vast and clean, and no smoke drifted to smudge the constellations. Lyra lay awake, her head against her folded arm, listening. There was a sound here beyond the crickets and night birds, a hum almost, a rhythm to the air. It filled her with longing, not fear, not hunger, but a strange sense that something more was coming. From the corner of her eye, she saw Tallow sit upright on his branch. He was old near the end, but his senses remained sharp. He, too, was listening. Without words, they shared that moment. The next morning, tracks appeared at the edge of the basin, not theirs. Lyra found them first, pressed into the dry mud near the far tree line. Wide pads, 3 toes, something canine, but larger than a jackal, hyenas. She called the alarm in short, sharp clicks. The others froze. Nara hissed commands. The young were gathered. Adults climbed trees or took defensive positions, stones clutched, in fists. They waited. The hyenas never came close. Only their shadows, flickering at the edge of sight. Watching. Tallow stood his ground all night, rock in hand, never blinking. By dawn, the predators were gone, driven off not by numbers or force, but by something new. Preparation. Stone had given them a boundary. In the days that followed, the clan grew bolder. They shaped more tools, dug for roots, stripped bark for water, carved branches for shelter. Lyra led no one, but all followed. Her quiet actions carried weight. She had become a memory maker, a weaver of change. One evening, while sharpening a fresh stone beside a pool, she noticed something odd. The surface of the water was trembling, not from her movements, from below. She leaned in. A soft murmur rose. Beneath the basin, deep and guttural. Then the earth trembled just slightly, enough to shift pebbles. An aftershock. The clan gathered quickly, instinct driving them uphill to higher stone. The tremor passed harmlessly, but it left a message. The land was still not settled. Nothing would be still for long. That night, as stars blinked overhead and insects sang their endless chorus, Lyra sat beside Nara beneath the fig tree. She handed her mother the original shard, the volcanic glass from the dry stream days ago. Nara accepted it solemnly. A moment passed. Then she handed Lyra something in return, a piece of bark, scratched by fingernail in a series of crude lines. Map, or perhaps a memory. Lyra smiled, not with her mouth, but with something deeper. The stone had taught her the power of shape. Now she was learning the power of sign. The first steps had been taken, not on dirt, but on stone. And the world would... Remember, the wind shifted. It began one morning with the rustling of leaves far louder than the breeze could explain. The birds, normally raucous near the fig trees, had vanished into the sky hours earlier. The insects stilled, and even the vultures that circled lazily above the cliffs had moved west, wings cutting through the air in uneasy silence. Lyra stood atop a ridge of warm stone, her toes gripping the edge as she looked across the valley. Something was wrong. The colors in the distance seemed altered, tinged with orange, and smoke threaded the far horizon in thin, ghostly lines. Then she smelled it. Ash. Faint, but unmistakable. Dry, burnt grass, scorched bark, and something older. The smell of earth cooked too long under a merciless sun. Fire. Lyra scrambled down the rocks, alert and fast. Her hands wrapped tightly around her new stone tool, a sharp flake smoothed along the grip from weeks of use. She weaved through sparse shrubs and fallen logs until she reached the grove where the clan had nested. Nara met her at the clearing's edge, already standing tall, her eyes wide. Tallow emerged moments later, his old arms powerful despite age, holding 2 large stones under one arm and a child clinging to the other. The message needed no words. The sky confirmed it. To the north, a wall of smoke now crept low across the grasslands. Wind brought with it flecks of black soot, like insects, falling from the clouds. Lyra led the way. The clan moved fast, abandoning the shallow basin for higher ground. They crossed bare rock and dry stream beds, cutting through the low ravines that offered cover and stability. Occasionally they stopped to drink from hollows in the stone or gather roots from shaded soil, but they never lingered long. By nightfall, the smoke had reached their former camp. They saw the flickering from miles away, fire rolling over the grass, slow and serpentine. It did not rage in chaotic bursts, but spread steadily, as if the land itself had decided to molt. The flames devoured everything in their path. They camped that night in silence on a high ridge, surrounded by stone and sparse vegetation. The stars blinked through the smoky haze like nervous eyes. Embers floated through the air like fireflies with no warmth. The children coughed quietly. Nara held Lyra's youngest sibling close, whispering soft clicks and coos. Lyra could not sleep. She sat apart from the others, watching the fire creep below. But then something strange caught her attention. Down in the far valley, among the blackened grass, there were other lights, small, isolated glows that remained long after the wave of fire had passed. They flickered not like wild flames, but like signals. She narrowed her eyes. These weren't lightning strikes or burning trees. These were coals, fires kept alive. The next morning, curiosity outweighed fear. When the wind shifted again and the smoke blew westward, Lyra ventured toward the edge of the burned plain. Her feet crunched over cooled ash. Her breath filtered through a thick leaf pressed against her nose. The fire had passed, but its memory still lingered. Blackened trees, collapsed burrows, and an eerie, hollow quiet. Yet the land was not dead. From under the charred surface, green already pushed through, tiny shoots, struggling toward light. The fire had cleared space, released seed, scorched the weak to make room for the persistent. She wandered further, careful not to disturb the fragile regrowth. Then she found it. A circle of stones, small, deliberate, arranged in a ring, and in its center, a smoldering core of blackened wood glowing orange beneath a thin crust of ash. A fire. Tended. Preserved. Someone had made this. She crouched near the ring and studied it. The smoke was faint but steady, a slow burn, not wild. Her fingers hovered above it, absorbing the warmth without touching the coal. The heat was familiar, comforting even, but the footprints around it were old. Whoever had made the fire was long gone. Still, Lyra saw the lesson. fire could live. It could be fed, shaped, held close, not just feared, but used. She carefully found a long branch from a nearby tree and pushed it toward the glowing center. It caught slowly, a faint orange shimmer spreading along its end. Her heart thudded. This was not lightning or wild flame. This was hers. By the time she returned to the ridge, the others had grown anxious. They smelled the smoke on her, saw the soot smudging her hands. But it was what she carried that made them freeze. The branch still smoldered. Not a blaze, not a threat, a tool. Nara approached first, sniffing, then touching the end cautiously. She recoiled slightly, then placed her hand on Lyra's shoulder. Curiosity, now overriding fear. Talo stepped forward. He had seen wildfires. He had seen fire kill, but never like this. Lyra laid the branch on a flat stone and gently fed it dried leaves from a nearby bush. The coals flared briefly, then calmed. Orange, alive. Quiet. They watched. As night fell, the small fire danced low between them. Less a beast, more a heartbeat. The days that followed were a turning point. Fire no longer chased them. It stayed. Beneath stones, in hollow logs, at the center of their camp, where dried roots were softened, where insects were drawn, where warmth made the cold stone less cruel. They learned to carry embers wrapped in green bark, to shelter it from wind, to place it on dry dung and watch it bloom back to life. One night, rain came. The fire hissed, sputtered, and died. Panic set in. The children cried. Even the adults looked to Lyra with desperate eyes. But she was already moving. At dawn, she returned to the old fire ring in the valley. The coals were cold, useless. But then, beneath a fallen tree, she found another pocket of heat, a deeper layer, tucked away, still burning faintly. She brought it back. Fire returned with her, and with it, hope. More than heat, fire brought something else, ritual. At dusk, the clan began to gather around it without command. They stared into it, eyes wide and silent. Sometimes they made soft sounds, clicks, hums, a rhythmic tapping of stone on bone. Lyra often sat nearest the flame, not as a leader, not in any way the clan would call chief, but as a center, a calm in the center of the storm. Around her, communication evolved. Hand signs, shared glances. The shape of language was being carved from need, not from rule, and fire was the medium. One evening, a strange event occurred. A young male, Dano, had taken a stick from the fire to chase a small rodent. In his excitement, he tripped and flung the torch straight into a patch of dried grass. Flames shot up fast, wild again. The clan scattered. Talo and Nara shouted warning clicks. Lyra grabbed the nearest branch and beat at the edges of the flame. Dano cried out, panicked. Then something happened. The others joined her, one by one, grabbing leaves, bark, sticks, beating back the fire, surrounding it, taming it. Together, the fire went out. And then they laughed, not with mouths as we know laughter, but in breathy exhalations, in shoulder bumps and soft hoots, relief, joy, triumph. They had not run, they had fought fire and won. Later that night, Lyra placed a ring of stones around the new fire. A lesson remembered. Boundaries mattered. She sat beside it, holding the ember stick close, her eyes reflecting the flame's slow dance. A thought stirred in her. This fire was not just warmth, it was memory, a record of their courage, of what they could become. She placed her hand on the stone beside her, dragging a finger through the soot to draw a crude spiral. She didn't know why. But something in her did. And so, the fire burned, not to destroy, but to gather, not to consume, but to forge. In the valley below, the grass would return, greener, stronger. Life renewed by flame. The earth had spoken through fire, and Lyra had listened. She had learned not to fear it. She had learned to keep it alive. Ash fell like whispers. In the days after the fire, the valley wore its wounds openly, blackened trees, curled leaves, the skeletal remains of once lush bushes. But beneath the surface, something was stirring. The soil, still warm from the heat, exhaled moisture. Tiny shoots, green and trembling, pushed up from the earth, from destruction, rebirth. Lyra crouched near one such shoot, her long fingers brushing the new growth. It was tender and bright, unlike the coarse grass that had blanketed the basin before. A change had begun, not just in the land, but in her thoughts. She dug gently with her sharpened stone, peeling away the topsoil to uncover the bulb beneath. A thick root, starchy and cool. Food. She smiled, an inward smile, deep and quiet, and gently reburied a piece beside it, near the waterline. A few days later, another sprout rose where she'd placed it. She stared at it for a long time. The D clan had returned to their shallow basin after the fire passed. The land was changed but habitable, and the presence of new growth drew insects, rodents, and even larger prey. Their food supply, once dwindling, was rich again. But Lyra had noticed something else. Where the fire had passed and the rain followed, seeds had erupted like a sudden memory. Her curiosity sparked again. She began to mark places with stones, simple. Arrangements to note where she buried roots or dropped seeds. In time, she began to recognize patterns, where the soil stayed moist longest, where shade from certain trees slowed drying, where tubers fattened quickly. The others watched, puzzled. They didn't understand her patterns, not yet, but they noticed that wherever Lyra lingered, food followed. One evening, Nara sat beside her near the fire ring. Lyra was sorting stones, some smooth, some with chips, some marked with scratches. She'd etched with bone. Nara reached out and picked one up, holding it to the firelight, a spiral. It was the same symbol Lyra had drawn in soot beside the fire after the great blaze. Now she had carved it deeper into rock. Nara didn't ask what it meant. She didn't need to. The spiral was memory, a turning point, a fire that had not consumed, but transformed. Lyra reached into her satchel and removed a palmful of seeds, round, dark, saved from a fruit she had crushed and tasted. She laid them beside the stone spiral and looked to Nara, then she pointed to the grove. Planted. Nara watched her for a long time, then gave a low sound, part click, part hum. Approval. Lyra began rising before the others. Each morning, before the sun crested the ridge, she would creep silently down into the basin with her stone blade and a carved stick, using them to loosen soil. She dropped seeds or parts of tubers into the holes, then covered them with ash and wet soil. Over time, she learned to recognize the sounds the earth made, how the soil held breath after rain, how roots groaned softly under pressure, how the wind changed tone when it passed over open earth. The land was speaking. She had only just begun to listen. The others at first remained content with foraging. They followed familiar paths, took what was needed, and moved on. But slowly, that changed. Not because Lyra told them to, she did not speak in commands, but because they noticed. Where she dug, food reappeared. Where she marked the soil, green followed. Dano, the impulsive young male who once scattered embers, began to mimic her actions. He watched where she planted and tried burying seeds himself, clumsily at first, but learning quickly. One day, he brought her a strange fruit, round and hard. She sniffed it, tasted a bit, and spat it out. Bitter. But Dano had already buried the seeds. Weeks later, green erupted where none had been before. Even the mistakes, it seemed, bore fruit. Then came the dry spell. A season passed with only 2 rains. The old watering holes dried to mud. Birds flew higher and further. The grass browned, crisping beneath their feet. Other bands, unseen but sensed, were on the move again. Faint calls echoed across distant cliffs. Tallow, always watchful, called for caution. But in their basin, green remained, not everywhere, just in the places Lyra had tended. Her ash-soil mixture, shaded saplings, and near-river planting had preserved small pockets of life, enough for roots to grow fat, enough for leaves to hold water. They survived where others wandered. One afternoon, as the sun cast long shadows, across the cracked plain, strangers appeared. They did not approach openly. Lyra spotted them first, dark shapes moving low near the tree line. She crouched and signaled, a sequence of clicks, soft and quick. Nara and Tallow responded at once, gathering the young and preparing to flee. But the strangers did not attack. They lingered, hungry, hesitant. Lyra and Tallow climbed a tree for a better look. There were 3 of them, 2 adults and a smaller one, thin, gaunt, but alert. Their ribs showed, one limped. They carried no tools, no embers, no food. Only desperation. For a moment, silence ruled. Then Lyra climbed down. She walked into the open, slowly, and placed a root, cleaned and still damp, on a flat rock. Then she retreated. The strangers waited. Minutes passed. Then one crept forward, snatched the root, and vanished. By nightfall, they were gone. But in the morning, a new pattern greeted them. A circle of stones, carefully laid, and a spiral carved in the center. Lyra stared at it, stunned. The strangers had watched her more closely than she thought. They had understood. From that moment, she realized something deeper. Change was not only survival, it was connection, memory, a language beyond sound. The marks in the dirt, the curve of a stone, the roots planted in the right place at the right time, these were becoming signs. She began carving more spirals, on stone, on bark, on the sides of trees. Each one marked a place of planting or regrowth, a memory for others. A whisper passed, not mouth to mouth, but hand to hand. One evening, the rain returned, a deep, nourishing downpour. The clan emerged from shelter to find the basin alive, leaves washed clean, soil black and fragrant. Lyra walked, barefoot through the mud, watching her tiny crops drink deeply. Dano ran past her, soaked and laughing, his arms full of roots. Tallow stood quietly under a tree, watching it all, and Nara, hands cupped with water, looked to Lyra and nodded once. solemn, proud. In that moment, Lyra saw her mother not as the leader of the clan, but as the bridge between what was and what would be, and she, Lyra, was walking across. That night, they danced. Not a dance of rhythm and form, but movement. Slow sways around the fire, shared glances, grunts that mimicked the pulse of falling rain. Even tallow moved, arms low, miming the digging of soil, the lifting of roots, the burning of fire. It was the first ritual, not one of death or fear, but gratitude. They had planted. They had grown. They had changed. Lyra lay beneath the stars, eyes open, heart full. She remembered the first time she had seen the stream shift course, the first tool in her hand, the fire she carried from coals, the seed she buried in ash. She remembered silence. Now there were stories, not told with words, but with actions and symbols and growing things. Change had begun with curiosity, but now it had become culture, and from that, something deeper still might rise. The dawn rose quiet and amber, casting long shadows across the cracked plain. Lyra stood at the edge of a new land, cooler, greener, broken by streams and sloping cliffs. Behind her, the footprints of her people traced back across dry riverbeds and ash-soaked hills. Ahead lay a future none could yet name. The journey had aged them. Some had fallen behind. Others had been born. The fire still burned in its basket, but dimmer now. Its heat passed more through memory than flame. What kept them moving wasn't survival anymore. It was something deeper, a shared direction, a purpose that lived in their voices and minds. They had become story-bearers. Each evening they gathered, not just for warmth or food, but to speak, in hums, tones, and gestures, but increasingly in new sounds. What began as names had become patterns. What began as mimicry had become meaning. The children played with these sounds, inventing, twisting, laughing. Lyra saw it in their eyes. Wonder, understanding, imagination. They were becoming more than their bodies. One child, barely weaned, drew circles in the mud, mimicking the planting. Spirals Lyra had once carved in bark. Another hummed a tune while tossing stones in rhythm. The sounds and shapes weren't just tools. They were becoming culture. One night, Shah, now heavy with her second child, began marking lines in the sand. As she spoke, connecting sounds to symbols. The others watched in silence, realizing that they were not just surviving the earth, they were changing it, leaving traces, building memory outside of flesh. As the cold winds grew harsher, they settled beneath an overhang near the cliffs, creating shelters with branches and stone. Here they rested longer. Here they taught. Tallow passed in his sleep, wrapped in skins and surrounded by the soft hums of those he once guided. They did not bury him immediately. For 3 days, they sat in a circle and shared sounds, his sounds. Memories carried not by gesture, but by voice. For the first time, they mourned with meaning, and when they finally laid him beneath the earth, Shah sang a series of tones none had heard before, a song. Many seasons passed. The ones who came after no longer remembered the droughts or the fire shelters or the cracked riverbed where Lyra first heard the wind whisper her name. But they remembered her, in songs, in marks on stone, in the rhythms passed from mother to child, and in their voices, now full, human, vast, They carried her whisper forward, a whisper that would one day become language, then story, then civilization. And it began with a murmur, a fire, a name spoken, into the wind. The epoch had ended, but the echo remained. The echo became us,